Front and Center. A focus on important and significant developments affecting the lives of Filipinos, not only in the Philippines, but also those living and working around the world. Join us in Front and Center. Here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service.
Welcome to Front and Center, where we focus on developments in the Philippines, legislation that provides policies and directions that strives to promote a better economy for the country, issues that concern the welfare and well-being of every Filipino. All of these and more will be Front and Center. And you can watch this program on our Facebook page and YouTube channel, Radyo Pilipinas World Service. And this program can also be heard on the following shortwave frequencies: 12.010 MHz, 15.640 MHz, and 17.820 MHz. And join us for another edition of Front and Center with your host, Jerome Toledo. And my guest today for this edition is a well-known economist. As recently, the Philippines posted its growth domestic product or GDP growth, which is at 6.3% in the second quarter of the year from the 4.3% growth rate last year. And also we have developments in the United States, particularly in its stock market, where it experienced slumping in daily trading. And also we also anticipate the interest rate cut from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. And to discuss more of that, we have the chief economist of Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, Sir Michael Rickerford. Sir Michael, thank you so much for joining us in the program.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Jerome, and to your viewers. And I'm honored to be in your program. Thank you.
All right, and it's our honor to have you in the program. So, I've mentioned a few seconds ago, the Philippine economic growth accelerated to 6.3% in the second quarter of the year from 4.3% in the same period last year. That's according to the data from Philippine Statistics Office. The factors why the GDP for that second quarter of the year climbs is, according to NEDA Secretary Arsenio Balaisacan, is due to public construction, which sustained double-digit growth at 20.8% from 12.1%. So as the government infrastructure agencies expedited the rollout of the Marcos Jr.'s administration's construction and rehabilitation project. And also, the government spending also contributed to the GDP growth through various social protection, health, and education program. And also, preparatory activities for the next election, which is the 2025 national and local elections, that also boosted spending. So, my question, Sir Michael, besides construction industry, what other areas should the government focus on so we can increase our GDP and also our output that will lead to economic growth?
Well, actually, our economic growth is among the fastest in the region, meaning in ASEAN or in Asia. So, we saw already some faster government spending because of course, it's recovering from a year ago. Because a year ago, it was the anniversary of the presidential elections, coming from of course, the base was higher during the presidential elections, and there were some pockets of government underspending earlier last year, and now we've seen that recovering, picking up the increase in government spending that has helped in the faster economic growth. So goes also, as mentioned, in the industry sector, some pickup especially in construction. That's also reflective of the increased government spending that positively affected the construction. And the other sectors that slowed down, the major ones include consumer spending, which accounts for at least 70% of the economy. So that's very important to stimulate, enable to have much faster economic growth. But this is understandable. The slower growth in consumer spending, uh, largely brought about by higher prices or inflation in at least for more than 2 years already. So it's understandable if prices have gone up for the past 2.5 years. So the ability to spend by consumers have been kind of reduced and impaired, so to speak, because of higher prices that lessened or reduced their purchases, enable to pay for the higher prices of goods and services. So that's why it's also very important going forward to have inflation that's slower and within the target of the central bank at the 2 to 4% target. Well, we've seen because we have seen inflation, the latest data that picked up to 4.4% in July, but that was largely brought about by uh, the effects of the Typhoon Karina. We've seen some
Mm.
pickup. Well, we have to expect that no, it Typhoon Karina happened July 23 to 25, and the massive flooding and related storm damage is similar to Typhoon Ulysses in November of 2020. That's nearly 4 years ago during the pandemic time, and
Mm.
also similar to the damage brought about by on Typhoon Ondoy nearly 15 years ago. That was September of 2009. And during those times, whenever there are large flood and storm damage, especially in here in the capital, in Metro Manila, and in nearby localities, provinces, and regions, there's some really pickup in inflation by about zero point 0.5 to 1 percentage point.
Mm.
So, yeah, but hopefully this will be temporary because in the coming months, we would see also as an offsetting positive factor. Well, the rice tariff on the rather the tariff on imported rice, which was effectively reduced to 15% from 30%. That's effective July 7 last month. So, and we have yet to see the arrival of more imported rice with lower prices. It's equivalent to a 20% discount. And because of the lower import taxes from 30 down to 15%. So, and the world price of rice has gone down to 2 year lows since last month, coming from 15-year highs that has been ongoing uh, b- for many months between August of last year till around June. So, so it would mean lower prices of imported rice because of the reduced import taxes or import rate, the tariff rate, and at the same time lower world price of rice.
Mm.
That would help bring down the prices of local rice, including the locally produced ones, and because of better weather conditions also that's attributed to the lower world price, because many other countries also experience drought, heat wave since late last year till early this year, and El Nino already officially ended here in the Philippines since June. So it would mean slower inflation going forward that would counteract the impact of uh, Typhoon Karina, because uh, rice accounts for nearly 9% of the inflation basket. So if you have lower prices of rice, it's going to slow down inflation. And the fact that most of the inflation that we have seen in recent months largely attributed to higher rice prices.
All right.
Rice prices,
Mhm.
yeah, well, locally, at least 20% year on year.
All
So
right,
it would
Mike.
really have a positive impact
All
eventually.
right. Since we're talking about weather related events like typhoon seasons and some, particularly and also El Nino and La Nina season. So would these weather phenomena may affect our economic growth?
Well, yeah, realistically, even early this year, had it not been for El Nino, the drought, yeah, that's another. Well, on top of the what I mentioned a while ago, the growth slowdown in consumer spending, We also saw a drag, a negative year-on-year growth, at least 3% in the agricultural sector. So that's largely attributed to the El Nino drought. Because reduced rainfall, the heat wave earlier this year, since fourth quarter of last year, that led to reduced output and production by the agricultural sector. Hence, we have seen that year-on-year contraction. And it's also, even a year ago, it was already contracting, though by a lesser extent. So that was a drag. Had it not been for that, economic growth would have been much faster. And had it not been for higher inflation, economic growth would have easily reached near 7%, if not even beyond 7%. And considering that now we're already among the fastest growing economies at 6.3% here in ASEAN. And that's why it's also very important to prepare now for La Nina, because, that's the foretaste of it. It was already started by Typhoon Karina. So that's the really the extreme case that could happen. But it just this one is, considering it's just the start of the typhoon season, the just we just got the onset of the rainy season since around June to July. So those are the risks going forward, to prepare for those kinds of weather disruptions in terms of increased rainfall brought about by La Nina later this year. So preparations, meaning to say, just like the similar to the preparations for El Nino a few months before that. Stockpiling, of course, preemptive. If there's a need, of course, it's still the priority to boost local production,
Mm-hmm.
but and to be augmented eventually by imports if necessary. We have non-monetary measures, as we call them, because we have seen reduced import tariffs also, not just on
Mm-hmm.
rice, but on corn, on pork and meat products, and coal. Well, it's really meant to. Well, those non-monetary measures have been ongoing since the pandemic time, and to augment the local supplies. We all know that this was prompted a few years ago by the African swine fever that reduced the pork output in the country. So
Mm-hmm.
the stopgap measure, well, is importation if needed. Same goes with the other agricultural products like rice, corn, sugar.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really meant to, to ensure that the inventories locally are well stocked to prepare for
Okay.
those weather disturbances. And of course, the penultimate objective is to keep inflation low. Of course, if supplies are sufficient locally, so prices would be tempered, and
Mm-hmm.
it would help reduce prices and counteract any upside pressure on prices at the very least. So, yeah, those are part of the non-monetary measures
Okay.
to better control and manage inflation going forward. And
Okay.
definitely, yeah, those are the
Mm-hmm.
challenges. Of course, there may still be intervention measures. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
our objective for our whole economy is to make it more inclusive, to make it more sustainable, and in the sense that there would be more sectors that would benefit from the positive economic numbers, like agriculture employs at least 20% of the total workforce. So it's really a matter of if interventions maybe still be needed, especially the use of technology to boost output,
Mm-hmm.
and to increase production, such as, of course, increased mechanization and automation of the
Mm-hmm.
processes, and higher yielding seeds, more resilient varieties to further boost output. And at the same time, of course, better irrigation facilities, the infrastructures like farm to market roads, the storage facilities,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. The objective, of course, is to further increase the productivity, increase output, and at reduce production costs that would eventually lead to lower prices of these agricultural commodities, and lessen the reliance on importation. So those are the fundamental things, and it would increase the incomes of those belonging in the agricultural sectors,
All
given
right,
the fact
Mike.
that
Okay.
yeah.
Since you mentioned earlier about the economic numbers, so I would like to put some numbers here. So yeah, just recently we had a 6.3% economic growth, but last year we have uh, we posted a 5.6% growth rate, and also in 2022, 7.4% year on year growth, and also in 2021, so we have posted an 11.8% year on year growth. But in comparison, Sir Mike, from the last administration, so the GDP aimed to continue, or it aimed to continue the growth path they inherited from its predecessors, which is the Aquino administration, expecting the economy to expand to 7 to 8% in the succeeding years. So, but instead, the GDP grew from 6.9% in 2017, 6.3% in 2018, and 6.1% in 2019. Then came the COVID-19 pandemic, which caused the economy to shrink to 9.6% in 2020. So I would like to ask Sir Mike, is the 5 to 6% growth rate good enough for the Philippines?
Well, it's achievable, considering that at that rate, that's already, yeah, it's within reach. The statistics, similar to what you mentioned, like even prior to the pandemic, from 2012 to 2019, the average economic growth, or the GDP growth for the Philippines, at least 6%. That's among the fastest growing economies, among relatively larger countries around the world. So, and then now, yeah, true. Last year we're better. A year ago it was 5.5%. And now we have seen 6.3% in the second quarter, after 5.8% in the first quarter. So that's the target is within reach, at least 6% growth. And even it's not just us. The multilateral agencies like the World Bank, IMF, ADB, they're of that view. They're all similar. Even the credit rating agencies, they do estimate uh, Philippine economic growth to be around 6% in the foreseeable future for this year, and maybe for the next 1 to 2 years. So and that has been well considered among the best and among the fastest in the region, because we're coming from a low base. Our per capita income is about $4,000, and our neighboring countries, their per capita incomes are much higher. Around the more developed ASEAN and Asian countries are like 10,000, 20,000, $30,000 per year. That's the average income per citizen. So there's nowhere to go but higher for the country. And the fact that because we're the last major economy to have reached a so-called demographic dividend, or demographic sweet spot, meaning majority of the population is already working age. More than 50 million Filipinos already working age. So they were ahead. Like Japan was 50 years earlier in 1965. Hong Kong and Singapore 1980. South Korea 1985. China 1990. And the other ASEAN countries were the more developed ones were ahead of us by 10 to 20 years. Now is the moment of the Philippines. We have seen them, those earlier than us, they experience economic growth of about 6 to 7%. Because that's because of the attractive demographics. The Philippines only started that around 2015, the demographic dividend, or demographic sweet spot, because our population is the 12th largest in the world, more than 113 million Filipinos, and average age is below 25 years old. Imagine, more than half of the population already working.
All
We
right,
have
Sir Mike. So it means to say that in the next 5 years, we're going to um, uh, or post 5 to 6% growth rate, or so let's say in the next 10 years, we're going to stay in this growth rate.
Yeah, at least, or at least on the high side, it could even be 6 to 7%, had it not been for, say, the challenge on higher prices or higher inflation, since for the past 2 years that was triggered
Mm-hmm.
by the Russia-Ukraine war or
Mm-hmm.
conflict. Those are external factors. Had it
Yeah.
not been for them, those risk factors, we would have been growing around
Mm-hmm.
7% already. So it's very much possible because of that demographic sweet spot. Same goes for those countries that earlier experienced that. So that's the
Mm-mm.
statistics. Next 5, 10 or so years, growth of 6 to 7%, very much possible. Imagine you have more than half of your population in this country already already working. They have incomes, they have spending power. They're young. They're below 25 years old. Of course, they would purchase homes. They would start as they start. Some of them may start families. They would purchase vehicles because they can afford it already, whether they're still single or they start families. And those who start families, they would be sending their children to school. They would
Mm-mm.
spend, they would travel, they would invest, and they would shop and so on. So
Mm-mm.
yeah, imagine the economic effects. And we're catching up practically. We're catching up because our per capita income, coming from a low base at around $4,000, we're now moving to the middle income country status. Nowhere to go but up. So it's the moment of the Philippines when it comes to development. So the gaps there, of course, they do see the potential in the country. We're now number 34 in the world for GDP, the highest GDP in the world. We're number 34 in 2023. That's already higher than number 38 in 2022. And the estimates, even by some of the global banks, they see the potential of the Philippines to go higher by another 20 notches in ranking to number 15 to number 20 by 2050 to 2075, because of this demographic sweet spot. It's already building the foundation for that. They
Okay,
do see
and
the
that will
potential.
happen, Sir Mike, if the government will be aggressive and active in attracting investors to place their investments here in the country.
Yeah, definitely. It's really that's really the policy challenge and the policy prescriptions, as well as the intervention measures, to have an environment that's very much conducive to business, whether it's attracting investments and also an enabling environment for even the locals to have more, to invest more, to set up more businesses, create more jobs, and yeah, it's really those. And of course, well, the budget, the national budget, the biggest allocation is education. Then second to that is infrastructure. Then after that, the social services like healthcare, nutrition. So if these are part of the intervention measures. Education, that's the biggest equalizer, that lifts more people out of poverty. No, so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's already free in state colleges and universities, and also in public schools from primary, secondary to college. So now, and that's the biggest, and it's an investment approach. Meaning,
Mm-hmm.
the returns are really immense. If you see, you bring out, there would be more people being more educated, especially the poor. It would lift more people out of poverty, and it would make the economy more productive, well educated, and eventually they become more productive as they enter into the workforce, as they reach, more of them reach the working age. So yeah, that's the potential going forward, especially on STEM courses, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, that would really be responsive to the requirements of the increasingly technologically savvy world economy. Well, meaning to say that, of course, those are the requirements, becoming more digital for many businesses, the use of technology to further boost productivity around the world. And also infrastructure is also very important, especially, well, of course, we all know there are limited resources. So it's really prioritizing the infrastructure projects that have the greatest return, greatest benefit to the most number of people around the country, to
All right,
boost
Mike, and
productivity.
I hope we can achieve that particular endeavors of attracting investors into our country, so that our GDP growth can accelerate even further on that 6.4% growth. And also, there is some developments around the world, particularly in US markets. As As I've read some news articles about stocks from the United States, it fell sharply last Monday with the Dow Jones Industrial Average posting its worst day in nearly 2 years. So they so the American investors are worried over the health of U.S. economy that may spark a global market sell-off. And also, Japan's stock market posted its worst drop since Black Monday in 1987. So that contributing fears of global turmoil in the market. So here in the Philippines, Sir Michael, is this something that our local financial market and state financial department and agencies watch out for? And what should the government do to avoid the crash?
Well, uh, what happened in the U.S. Stock markets? Because they have gained really so much. They have gained quite a lot. So that partly explains the healthy downward correction because this was triggered by their economic data, so softness in especially the jobs data since last Friday. So that accelerated it because there are fears of the risk of recession because it's not just the jobs data a few days or a few weeks even prior to the to that sell off. Yeah, softness in various economic data like manufacturing and many other data out of the United States that signal a possible risk of recession because that's kind of engineered because the U.S. Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, they have increased interest rate dramatically from zero, practically zero, 2.5 years ago, around March of 2022, because of the Russia-Ukraine war that created some volatility in oil, in commodity prices, and led to higher inflation since then. The U.S. Central Bank raised aggressively because it was zero was during the pandemic time to really support and stimulate economic growth, create more jobs and other business activities during the pandemic time. But when inflation picked up because of the said war, the Russia-Ukraine war, so they were forced to able to control inflation because that's their mandate. Their mandate is price stability, so they would
Mm-hmm.
do everything at their disposal. You say even of course they would have to slow down the economy by through higher interest rates even if there's a risk of recession. They're going to do that just to make sure inflation is under control. But as they have done their jobs to keep interest rates higher for longer to bring down inflation, so it
Mm-hmm.
effectively slowed down the world economy.
All right. And
usd
here in the Philippines, Sir Michael, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas or BSP announces that, or they said in a statement that a rate cut this month of August was now little less likely after inflation in July had turned out slightly worse than expected. So, although the BSP Governor Remolona Jr. Did not rule out the possibility of an off-cycle easing. However, the Finance Secretary Ralph Recto said that an early rate cut more so is needed as the government seeks to raise cash at cheaper costs and as fast as it can to pay maturing debts, including the pandemic era borrowing. So, how do you see DOF Secretary Rector's advice? So, should the BSP proceed on implementing early rate cut?
Well, if it's possible, why not? Because that's also needed. Because in the United States, because of the weaker data, as we just mentioned a while ago, they're trying to avoid the risk of recession because they've done already their job. The U.S., even the global central banks, including ours, they have already brought down inflationary pressures. Commodity prices have gone down already because of course, higher interest rates, slow down the economy, slow down investments, global trade, and other business and economic activities by way of because higher interest rates made borrowings more expensive for businesses to start businesses, for also consumers to purchase homes, vehicles, and other consumer items and other institutions as well. So it slowed down the demand for commodities. That's why commodity prices have gone down and inflation already started to ease. And now inflation for the US and even here in the Philippines is already moving towards the central bank targets. And thus, that would already help justify rate cuts as that has kept markets kind of excited about that because um yeah, actually, that's a consequence of weaker economic data that would already highlight the need for starting with the Fed, the U.S. Central Bank, to start cutting rates. And of course, our local central bank would match them to maintain the interest differentials. Because when rates were rising,
Mm-hmm.
everybody else around the world, the other central banks also followed. Now, if the
Mm-hmm.
Fed starts cutting rates, same goes because the guidance of the Federal Reserve in its official dot plot since December, they already mentioned cutting rates. And based on their latest assessment last June 12, they're going to cut rates by
Mm-hmm.
0.25 at least this year well, although point 0.5 is cannot be ruled out, it's possible. And next year they will cut again by another one
Mm-hmm.
percentage point, and by 2026 another 1 percentage point. So that's a total of more than
Mm-hmm.
2.25 percentage points for the next from this year to 2026, and the BSP would likely match that.
Mm-hmm.
And because now our key interest rate is at the 17-year high of 6.5%.
Mm-hmm.
It came from a record low of 2%. Last time we saw that was May 2022, or more than 2 years ago. So that's similar to, in the US. They
Mm-hmm.
came from zero March of 2022, last time we saw it during the pandemic era. And now it's at a 23-year high of 5.25 to 5.5%.
I
Now,
see.
with the cutting of rates, that's good. That's gonna help the economy further,
Mm-hmm.
and that would lead to faster economic growth because it would make uh borrowing costs,
Mm-hmm.
financing costs
Mm-hmm.
lower. And that would encourage more businesses to take out loans to start new businesses and expansion projects, even and create more jobs. Same goes for consumers as they purchase homes, vehicles, and the other purchases of consumer goods.
Mm-hmm.
They also
I
so that
see.
would
Mm-hmm.
down the road it would really
Mm-hmm.
now it would accelerate economic growth. That's an inverse of what happened when they were raising rates. When they were raising rates, the central banks were deliberately slowing down the economy to
Mm-hmm.
control inflation.
I
Now,
see.
if inflation would stabilize and be more manageable and under control, they may now try to reduce the interest rates and now
Mm-hmm.
help stimulate economic growth and development around the world
Mm-hmm.
by way
Mm-hmm.
of course, so that's the chain reaction. If you have
Mm-hmm.
lower credit costs or borrowing costs, so yeah, it's a growth driver. It would make credit cheaper,
All
borrowing
right.
costs cheaper. So
And my
uh,
last question, Sir Mike, since you mentioned that the interest rate cut is a tool to control the inflation rate. So, my last question is, how often should central bank implement interest rate cuts?
well,
Ideally.
it's based on data. Actually, they already gave good guidance as to the pace. As early as September, the U.S. Central Bank would start cutting rates by 0.25, and another rate cut this year, and another 0.25, saying the fourth quarter cannot be ruled out. That's already the signaling also. Locally, uh, possible zero point 0.5 total rate cuts here in the Philippines. And next year, it would match any Fed rate cuts. If the Fed's going to cut another 1 percentage points or 100 basis points, that would be matched locally. If the Fed cuts further by another 100 basis points by 2026, so yeah, so it's really they do act based on data. The central banks,
Mm-hmm.
if inflation is indeed already moving towards the central bank targets, already under control,
Mm-hmm.
then they would that would already allow them to ease
Ease.
monetary
Mm-hmm.
policy and try to stimulate more economic growth because now they're kind of the rate hikes. That's the so-called restrictive monetary policy to really slow things down. It's like a moving vehicle. When the speed becomes fast, even if inflation, well, especially if inflation, because inflation, if that is not controlled, it's gonna spiral. So they have to step on the brakes. They step on the brakes so that it would be safe for the vehicle. Well, like the economy is like the vehicle moving towards a destination. So from time to time, they have to step on the brakes. Then, if it becomes safe already, they're gonna accelerate again the movement of the vehicle, enable for it to sustain its movement towards the desired destination of sustainable economic growth and development. So that's the destination. So it's really having that safe voyage because there are perils along the road that may need stepping on the brakes, like the perils of inflation. Because inflation, if it's not controlled, if it's not in Tagalog, nirendahan, it's gonna
Mm-hmm.
spiral. So far,
Mm-hmm.
the U.S. has been successful because after right a few months after the Russia-Ukraine war, inflation in the United States, it reached a 40-year high of 9.5% by June of 2022. That's barely 4 months since the Russia-Ukraine war started. So that's how delicate it is. They try to nip the problem at the bud, try to solve the problem at the onset. Learning from the experiences, especially in the 1970s and the early 80s, when there's this geopolitics of oil, because the Russia-Ukraine war, Russia is among the biggest oil producers in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
Russia and Ukraine, they're a powerhouse in the commodities market. They account for 25% of the grain
Mm-hmm.
trade, meaning for corn, for wheat, the trades between those two countries undergoing conflict or war,
I
they
see.
account for almost 25%, a fourth of the world's trade for wheat and the grains market. So that's why the central banks
Mm-mm.
they tried to control inflationary pressures. They slowed down the demand, and now they've been successful because they effectively the higher interest rates as they step on the brakes. You know,
Mm-hmm.
commodity prices went down.
I see.
Wheat prices now at 4-year lows. That's the lowest since 2020, since the pandemic time. Even world corn prices, soybean prices, they have gone down already. Between even sugar
Mm-hmm.
prices, the lowest in 2 to 4 years. Rice prices have gone down to
Mm-hmm.
2-year lows. That's the effect of tighter monetary policy. Step on the brakes to control inflation. At least
Mm-hmm.
learning from the lessons whenever there are geopolitics involving oil and other commodities. They've been successful in doing so, and now they just want to make sure that
Mm-hmm.
it's on a sustained path towards their targets of in the US it's 2%
I
inflation
see.
target. Here in the Philippines it's 2 to 4%. That's why it's really a delicate task now. Come August 15, next Thursday, this coming Thursday, inflation briefly breached the inflation target. It's now at
Mm-mm.
4.4 from 3.7%. For more than half a year, it was already below 4% because of the Typhoon Karina. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
upon careful assessment, there would be a chance for inflation again to go down to below that
Mm-hmm.
inflation target to below 4%. And that would allow,
Mm-hmm.
uh, as a matter of policy, rate cuts. Yeah, rate cuts already. Because if inflation is indeed under control, because there are one-time factors like the impact of Typhoon Karina, similar to the effects of Typhoon Ulysses and Nondoy in
Mm-hmm.
recent years. So when there's a pickup, but hopefully the pickup in prices would only be temporary.
Uh, all right, Mike. That was a very interesting to discuss, but we don't have much time to further discuss about the inflation rates as well as some developments in our economy. But anyway, thank you so much, Michael Rickerford, for joining us in the program.
Yeah, you're most welcome, Mr. Jerome,
Uh,
and to your viewers. And have a good day, everyone.
all
Thank
right.
you so much.
All right. And that was Michael Ricafort, the Chief Economist of Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation. And that concludes this edition of Front and Center on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Together with our producer Erwin Peñano and technical personnel Milo Janela, this is your host Jerome Toledo saying, Mabuhay and love the Philippines.
You have just heard and watched Front and Center. Front and Center. Join us again for another edition here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Front and Center.